Hey guys, welcome to another episode of 914s for Newbies. Today we're going to take a look at the engine. Now all Porsche 914s left the factory with the VW Type 4 engine in one of three flavors, either the 1.7, the 1.8, or the most desirable 2.0 liter. They all have subtle differences, but today I'll just give you an overview of all the main components so that you understand how they all work together. This is the 74 2-liter from my Bumblebee, and the car is in paint and body right now, so it's a good opportunity to go through the engine and also give you a tour of it. Now, in order for an engine to run, you need air, you need fuel, and you need spark. So we'll take our tour in that order. This is the air intake plenum and throttle body. It's covered up now so stuff doesn't get into the engine. What happens is the amount of air that enters the engine is controlled by the throttle cable, which pulls this and changes the damper inside. And the cable anchors right here. So air enters this unit and then comes through the runners here down to where it interacts with the fuel injectors. The fuel injectors squirt gas in there, it all atomizes together, and that's what enables combustion to happen. So one of the things you have to watch out for on these air intakes is that there aren't extra holes or rust in the seams here that allows air to get in, because that will absolutely affect your idle and it'll be very difficult to get the engine to run right. This plate is where the air filter goes. The 2.0 liter air filter sits right on top of this and then fits right over the throttle body here. This is the throttle position sensor, which does exactly what you think it should. This is also part of the air system. It's called the AAR, or Auxiliary Air Regulator. Some people call it the Auxiliary Air Valve. And what happens is there's a little heating element inside there. When the engine's cold, the heating element is on and it opens up a little damper and allows extra air to feed into the air intake manifold here, so that the car idles a little bit higher. This is the MPS, otherwise known as the manifold pressure sensor, and in a lot of ways it really is the heart of the engine. It tells the brain basically what to do. It's usually mounted to the body outside of the engine, but in the engine bay, and inside there's a diaphragm that can wear out. So these things do go bad, but fortunately there are some gurus that know how to fix them. If you're a new 914 owner or just want to be, please subscribe to the channel now so you know when new content is posted. So now let's talk a little bit about fuel. These are the fuel rails, and what would happen is if the engine is in the car, the fuel would enter on this side. It would go down in here. There are the injectors once again. It comes back up through here to a hose and then goes to the other side of the engine, which looks just like the right side of the engine. The injectors are here, and those get plugs from the fuel injection harness that controls the injectors there. So it goes through the fuel rail here, and this is the fuel pressure regulator. So there would be a hose here, and that would go straight back to the pipe that returns to the gas tank. One other fuel-related element here is you see that there's a T on this fuel rail, and that goes here to the cold start injector. And what that does, if you look here, there's another fuel injector, and when the engine is cold, additional gas gets squirted into the air intake here to give it a little bit of a boost, so that by the time the air gets down to the fuel injectors here, it's a little richer in fuel and a little easier to get going. This is the idle adjustment screw. This is the screw you would turn to adjust the amount of air coming into the throttle body, which is what determines how fast the idle goes, assuming you don't have any other air leaks in the system. This whole thing is tied together with a series of hoses, speaking of air, which are not on this engine right now. But Jeff Bowlsby has a great map for where all the hoses go, and I'll put a link for that in the description of the video. So now we have air, we have fuel, and the next thing we need is spark. So coming over to this side, this is the coil. And what happens is the ignition harness sends power to here. This would actually be connected here. And power goes from the coil to the center of the distributor, and then the rotor spins in the distributor and distributes the spark. Now, on a 914, the firing order is 1, 4, 3, 2. So this lead would go to the number 1 cylinder, this to the number 4, and so on. Now, some people's distributors are different, and some people's are off by a tooth, so it may be oriented a little bit differently, but that's generally how things go. And you can see the cap is off here, so you can see the rotor underneath there. The way you adjust the distributor for timing, which we're not going to get into really in this video, but that's the very long nut-like thing that you loosen to be able to spin the distributor and adjust the timing. Now, following the leads down here, we have the spark plugs. And in a 2.0 liter engine, the spark plugs are more at an angle, as you can see here. Like on a 1.8, they'd be much more vertical, much more up and down. But these are at an angle, which is one of the dead giveaways of a 2.0. The other dead giveaway of a 2.0 is the manifold here is 3 bolts. 1, 2, 3 instead of 4. So a 2.0 liter car will have a 3-bolt manifold there, and that's what you want to look for if you're looking for a 2.0 liter. This is the oil tower. This is where you put oil into the engine. Here's the dipstick, how you check it, and the PCV valve here sends gases back into the engine for reburning. This is the viewing port, which allows you to look down in there and see the notch there. Use this for timing the engine. You look for marks on the fan. Another way to do that is to look at the flywheel here, and you see that there's a notch. When this notch is lined up with the split in the case, which is right here, you should be at either top dead center of number 1 or number 3. Because these are air-cooled engines, the flow of air around the engine is super important. So what happens is this fan generates a bunch of air which flows on the right side over the cylinder head and into the oil cooler, and on the left side just over the cylinder head. There are flaps that control the amount of air that flows, which are controlled by this. There's a thermostat underneath the engine which is connected usually by a cable to this thing here, and when the engine is cold, the flaps will be kind of in that position there, and as the engine warms up, the flaps open to that. And one of the great things about this design is that it fails in the open position. So it's a pretty good design. You don't want to remove this flap. It's important that it's there. It aids in warm up and is exactly what you want. This is the alternator that's on the left side of the engine, and there are ports that you can pull off here, like little plastic covers to adjust the bolts and change the belt if you need to. Rotating the engine up a little bit, we see the oil cooler, which is right here, and if you can see, the air kind of flows over here, and then using those flaps, the air is directed through the oil cooler here. It looks just like this on the top as well, and air just passes through to cool things down. Here's the oil filter, of course, right next to it. These under here are the famous pushrod tubes, which are a primary source of leaks. The reason why is because, as you can see, they go into the block and they also go into the head. So they need to seal well, and they need to move a little bit too. If these are dented, or the seals are old or hard, or they weren't installed properly, you're going to have oil leaks. Going lower here, this is where you change your oil. this plug here. I don't know why it's red on this car. It should just be regular bolt colored. And this area over here is where the oil strainer is. Now when you change the oil strainer, you have to be super careful with this center bolt. It can't be tightened more than 9.4 foot-pounds of torque. It's got incredible tolerance, and if you over tighten it, you could cause a lot of damage. When you hear people talk about the taco plate, it's this area here. It holds the oil temperature sender, and there's also another plate that goes on top of this to protect it all. The valve cover is off here, so you get a good look at the valve train. You have the exhaust and the intake and the exhaust. 2 valves for each cylinder. Adjusting the valves is a major point of 914 ownership, and we'll cover that in a separate video. These are the heat exchangers here, and they're really ingenious. What happens is hot exhaust gases come through this pipe here, and the pipe is clad. It's almost like a sandwich inside, and there's air circulating around the pipe. The heat from the exhaust is exchanged with that air, heating up that air, and then another fan pushes that hot air, which doesn't contain exhaust gases, out through here and into the ducting of the car. This loose wire here leads to the CHT, otherwise known as the cylinder head temperature sensor, which is really important in smooth running as well. This is the ECU, a very primitive 1974 computer that controls the fuel injectors. So the harness plugs in here and then gets connected to the injectors and all of the other bits and pieces electronically in the engine. So there you have an overview of the 914 Type 4 engine. It's a very reliable engine, and it's not too difficult to work on, so go ahead and get your hands dirty. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, be safe and enjoy.